You know what's great? When a special story doesn't have any real effect in the ongoing story and is mostly just there for fun. As we'll notice here in issue 45, Robotnik is no longer marooned, nor does he make any mention of it. We've had our romp, and now it's time to get at least a little bit more serious, which is ridiculous considering the contents of this issue. Hi, Moby. But I will say, I do love this cover. The lighting and the background is spectacular, and the detail on Moby and Sonic is fantastic. And I admit I'm a bit of a sucker for covers that incorporate the logo into itself in creative ways. In this case, having Moby hold up a big stone slab with the name of the comic on it. It's just really cool. We open on a brief recap page explaining who Moby is and where he's from. Gotta keep in mind, he was basically just a one-off character for a story that honestly wasn't terribly memorable, and as he does play a part in this story, it was probably a good idea of them to remind the audience that he did exist. We open on Uncle Chuck, overhearing a conversation between Robotnik and Snively, how they plan to use something called the Eco-Destroyer to start tearing apart the Mobian jungle to both establish a base of operations there, and also find and destroy any sort of resistance that might be hiding out in there. Chuck relays this information to the other freedom fighters, and Sally has them split into teams of 2 to try and find the jungle dwellers to get them to move deeper into the jungle, while she thinks of a way to stop the destroyer. Bunny and Tails are on one team, with Rotor and Sonic on the other. Later in the jungle, Sonic rushes back to Rotor to find him examining a bush full of berries. He refers to them as narcoleptus berries, a fruit that causes sleepiness in whoever eats them. Turns out Sonic ate a whole bunch of them and falls asleep, just in time for the two of them to get ambushed by a small group of gorilla fighters. Ha. They're taken prisoner, and Rotor's forced to cook them some stew. Sonic tries to bargain for their freedom by telling them of a hidden stash of weapons out in the jungle. Of course, Sonic's just trying to fool them, and sure enough, he uses his speed to quickly sneak into their storehouse, load it down with weapons, and then bring it back in the hopes of tricking them into letting him and Rotor go. But it turns out he was moving so fast, he didn't realize he'd scooped up the storeroom guard as well, getting both him and Rotor chained to the trees outside. Sonic notes that the apes used to be pretty gentle, but their time fighting Robotnik has changed them, and now they doubt Robotnik will ever set foot in their jungle, just in time for the Eco-Destroyer to show up and start tearing things apart. Snively and several SWAT bots find Rotor and Sonic chained down, and he gloats that soon Robotnik will be arriving to take in his handiwork. He leaves, leaving several SWAT bots behind to watch over Sonic as Tails and Bunny show up with someone to give them a hand. Turns out to be Moby, who they ran into during their own trip in the jungle. The three of them manage to take out the guards and free Sonic and Rotor, but while they think they could get the gorillas to assist them now, they're all conked out. Turns out Rotor had laced the stew he was making with those berries they found earlier in hopes of giving them an opportunity to escape. So, with only the 5 of them, Sonic states that if he could get inside, he might be able to stop the destroyer. Tails flies up towards the cockpit to distract Snively while Sonic runs inside via the bottom. Snively takes a few shots at him, but after he flies off, he invites Robotnik onto the machine to view it in action. But as soon as the machine starts up again, it collapses in on itself, Sonic having disassembled it from the inside out. Robotnik and Snively fly off in the pod atop it, while the gorillas give Sonic and friends an apology for their earlier behavior. Sonic assures them that he's still more than happy to call them an ally. He also asks them to tell Moby goodbye for him, as the cave dweller ended up eating most of the drugged stew and will probably be sleeping for a good long while. This story is mostly inoffensive and harmless, but usually whenever I think about it nowadays, I can't help but think about its goofy nature in comparison to the absolute seriousness we're going to be seeing over the next several issues leading up to the 50th. The inclusion of Moby strikes me as a little odd. Yes, this issue takes place in the area where he went to when we first met him, but his actions in this issue basically amount to destroying a SWAT bot, breaking a chain, and then eating a bunch of soup. It is nice to have a reminder that there are a lot of different characters out there trying to help fight Robotnik, but the fact that they had to include an entire page at the beginning of the story just to make sure everyone knew who he was does speak volumes about his nature as an originally one-off character. I don't necessarily dislike him, but he's not really so much a character as he is a plot device. The plot itself moves at a nice fast pace, never lingering on one scene for too long, which I think works well for a story of this nature. And it even introduces elements that pay off in unexpected ways, like the berries not only causing Sonic to fall asleep, but then being used as an excuse as to why they don't have a lot of assistance later on. not that they really needed it. In terms of art, well, it's once again good old Dave Manik on pencils, and he does a very fine job with his usual cartoonish expressive style, which really fits the goofier, more lighthearted tone that Angelo De Caesar's writing was going for. I'll also give very special mention to the colorist of this issue, Barry Grossman, who does a great job of making the green jungle setting, which could have very easily been boring and samey, look quite varied and wild, and the designs of the guerrilla army are particularly off-putting in the best way, making them look ugly and animalistic like a gang of thugs. But we aren't done quite yet. Time for us to get back into Knuckles' quest for the Sword of Acorns and see if he makes any progress there. We open on Knuckles acting as a servant for this rabbit woman here. He recounts the past several issues, stating that he had the Chaotix help him figure out where to go to find the Land of the Dark. As it turns out, it might just be another name for the Forbidden Zone on the outskirts of Angel Island. When he heads there, he's accosted by a sorcerer who attacks him with bolts of magic, and then is brought under the rabbit's thrall with a single look. Knuckles can still think for himself, but he physically can't do anything against her while under her spell. He takes this unwanted downtime in stride, however, using it as an opportunity to reassess everything he knows and what the ancient walkers told him. He figured that the Enchantress herself probably isn't all that powerful, and the sorcerer doesn't have anyone else around beyond his girlfriend. Since he was told to approach the situation with patience, he decides to do just that, remaining servitile to the two of them for several days, doing menial tasks, waiting for the chance to escape, most likely having something to do with the Paladin. And his patience is rewarded. Oh yeah! The Paladin, referring to himself as Sir Connery, bursts through the wall, using his own magic to blind the two mages, freeing Knuckles from the Enchantress's hold. He launches himself at the sorcerer and even distracts him by using some Echidna magic, sleight of hand, to make all of his tools and potions disappear before socking him hard enough to knock him out. With the two of them tied down, Knuckles gets a chance to talk with the knight, who states that his sword isn't the one he seeks, but was given to him by the walkers. Unfortunately, Connery cannot join Knuckles on his quest, as he is on a crusade of his own, which requires him to purge the rest of the land of evil magic users, using the Sword of Light to apparently kill the Enchantress and the Sorcerer. And yeah, he might not actually cut them or anything, but with the way that he talks and the fact that we never see those two again, it's fair to say he killed them. Whether it was the Blast of Light that did it, or he did so off-screen after knocking them out, doesn't really matter. Before he leaves though, he does give Knuckles a bit of guidance to the next link in the chain to the sword. Knuckles, however, is getting a little bit fed up with these riddles and wild goose chases, but if the sword's at the end of the chain, he's willing to do it. Once again, this backup story for Knuckles' quest is pretty damn good. The villains of the story are pretty one-dimensional, but then again, they were pretty much always going to be, basically just being links in an ever-growing chain. Sir Connery being introduced here also basically paints him as a pretty one-dimensional character as well, and unlike Merlin, who made a strong first impression with his magic, Connery does actually just come off as a pretty zealous, fanatical knight, totally devoted to a single purpose that happens to involve killing off evil magic users. And unlike Knuckles, I'm interested in seeing where the next link in the chain will lead. If there is a criticism I could have for it, and it's a minor one, it is that there's a rather big tonal shift from the first story, reversing the usual way that a story like this is presented. Having a sillier story follow a serious one works because it is a come-down, a nice way to unwind from something more intense or serious. True, if you have a very serious story followed by something very silly, it can cause some whiplash, but the gap in tone is generally more forgiving when going from serious to silly rather than vice versa. It's no deal breaker, of course, but it is slightly noticeable. Next time, hoo boy, we begin revving up for the penultimate story before we dive straight into one of the biggest, most well-remembered storylines in the comics history as we take a look at issue 46. I'll see you all next time, everyone.